Did I forget anything?
One last thing in relation to confidentiality, because, and again, just in relation to specifically rural areas, I know there was kind of research carried out in West Cork as well, where West Cork Women Against Domestic Violence are located. And one of the things that really transpired was how women in rural areas come to disclose or to report or seek help is different to in more built-up areas, and is because of how difficult it is to keep confidentiality in a rural area. And it was that women often went to their GP, because that can be, like, you could be going in for a cough, or, you know, it's just, you're safe there, no one's going to know what you're doing, kind of. So, like, that's just one example of how it's different in a rural area like that. You wouldn't feel comfortable necessarily going straight to Marie. It's often like it goes kind of through those channels. And I suppose that would certainly then apply to people talking to their employers as well, as that fear of the confidentiality aspect being broken. So I just thought I'd see, Marie, if you have any insight into how that might work.
I'm listening to you. I think this is, and I love the idea that you're willing to talk to other businesses. I might get you down to West Cork. But I was thinking about the confidentiality aspect of it there in that discussion, and I suppose it's really. We are dealing with very small businesses, mostly in West Cork. There's a couple of big companies in Clonakilty, but stop that, Marie. But you're mostly dealing with businesses that are in maybe the hotel and leisure industry and tourism. That would be your basic kind of employers, and they would be small, maybe family-run hotels. And so to be able to come out, as it were, and say to an employer what's going on for you would be extremely difficult, because not only are they going to know, they're probably going to know your perpetrator partner as well, and may even have connections to them and be related and all of that. So one of the things I was going to ask, if I could ask you, Deputy O'Reilly, in order to make this work, would there be any penalties to the breaching of the confidentiality?
There are standard penalties in relation, but you'd have to go to the WRC to vindicate that, and you'd have to assess then the level of damage to the person. But I suppose the intention is that, in the same way as if someone comes to you and says, I have whatever illness or that you might have, there's an obligation on the employer not to be down in the local centre going, well, did you hear what your woman has? So like that exists already, and that, again, not to be like massively labouring the point, but just to do it a bit. That's why it's in the Organisation of Work and Time Act, because the intention is when you have that time off, it's your own business, it's your own time, and you're availing of the leave. And I just to say very briefly, what's been brilliant about all of the discussions on this so far is not one person has said, oh, what if someone takes that leave when they're not entitled to it? Because I do if that's ever raised, I make every person in the room answer the question, would you apply for this leave if you had not? Everyone that I've ever met has said no. So that doesn't come up, but it has to be treated. And you do run the risk, in the same as you do when you go to your employer and you say, I'm going into hospital next week to have a procedure. You gotta hope, but you run the same risk, no disrespect intended, if you go to confession. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's once you put something out there, it's out there, and you are putting your trust in the employer. But the reason, and there's many good employers who are going to move ahead on this, NUIG, Ulster Bank and others, they will move ahead. Vodafone have already done it, and NUIG the same. So there are very good employers, but the legislation is necessary for those employers who maybe, I'm not going to say aren't good employers, right, but just might need a little nudge in the direction of going that way. So that's why, and part of the legislative process is this discussion. It's bringing it out into the open, but it's also reminding people this is leave. So if Mrs. Murphy is off because she's getting her veins done, then it's nobody's business, only her and her doctor and anyone else that she wants to tell. In the exact same reason as if Mrs. Murphy has to go to court, it's nobody's business. But you cannot legislate for people talking to each other with a mouthful of clothes pegs over the garden fence, because that's going to happen, and it would be silly for us to try to legislate for that. So what we've tried to do is include it with that leave that exists already, building on that practice that that people in HR and people in the unions and the representative organisations have to have, and you have to bring. And sometimes you're only as good, and the chair will notice as well, you're only as good as your reputation, and you won't last very long either in HR or as a representative if you get the reputation of someone who gossips. So it's treated in that way, and the confidentiality is treated in that way, and it's building on that confidentiality which exists and has built up over years, and that's how HR has to work. It's not how it always works, but it is how it should. So it's not, in terms of the penalties, those exist already for other forms of leave and the confidentiality. And also you have, again, overlaid on top of that the obligations that all employers have in relation to GDPR. Big, small, you know, massive global multinational corporations, two-person operations, that obligation is there as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the extra time.
Thanks. Deputy Moran O'Connor.